My name is Wyndham Whynot, and we will be discussing castles, forts, and palaces. One of the important things to understand is there's actually a difference between a castle, a palace, and a fort. So castles are structures built as a residence, but also for defensive purposes. A palace is primarily built as a residence, but they're not designed for defensive purposes. And a fort is designed as a temporary or permanent structure for military purposes. Often these three terms, especially castle and palace, are used interchangeably. Now, my first introduction to a castle was Hohenecken Castle. Now, these two pictures are not my pictures. I was there when I was 5 years old, and I lived in that little village you can see in the background of that aerial picture. And every morning I could either look out the window of my apartment or on the street and could usually see the castle grounds. This was built during the 1200s and is located in Kaiserslautern, Germany, in the little suburb village of Hohenecken. As I grew older, I began to travel more. Going to Denmark, one of the places I visited was Helsingor, which is in Denmark, and there I was able to visit Kronborg Castle, sometimes nicknamed Hamlet's Castle. This was the site used by Shakespeare in his play Hamlet. As you can see, it has a fortified wall. It is built in the Renaissance style. It has a wet moat, which is not necessarily the most common type of moat. Obviously, you can see the front gate. The inner courtyard. Tourists are allowed to go through large parts of the castle to tour. The inside of the castle has a variety of rooms. These are just a few of them. Tapestries were often hung to provide a semi-form of insulation. Oftentimes you'd have fireplaces. Interesting enough, a number of palaces and castles actually have chapels inside of them. We see the bedroom there on the top. One of the interesting things here is the statue of Ogier the Dane, which is in the casements. Legend says that he will rise in Denmark's time of greatest need to save the country. If you go across the bay to Helsingborg, Sweden, which was held by Denmark for a while, you can see the Karnan Castle, or what's left of it. The main feature, of course, is this tower. Kronborg Castle and Karnan were across from each other and controlled the entrance into and out of the Atlantic Ocean to the Baltic Sea and vice versa. They charged tolls that were to be paid to the King of Denmark for passage through the territorial waters. The tower is pretty much just a tower now, not a lot of rooms or anything else. You can visit in there. It's quite the walk up the tower. This is the Royal Palace in Oslo, Norway. It is actually in use by the royal family. You can go and see the changing of the guard at particular times during the day. This tower palace was built during the 1830s, 1850s, and is slightly inland from the Oslo fjord. However, along the Oslo fjord, you can see Akershus Castle, which is also in Oslo, Norway. And as you can see, this is much more defensive than the palace. This castle complex is made up of a number of buildings. Once again, this castle is open to visitors. Once again, you see the chapel. The king or the members of the aristocracy would be able to sit in the enclosed balcony. You see the dining room and some of the courtyard buildings and structures. If we go across to Lithuania, Lithuania was ruled by Grand Dukes and Gediminas was one of these Grand Dukes, and he built several castles in Vilnius. This is part of the Upper Castle. This is known as Gediminas Tower. You can walk up to the structure, as you can see parts of the ruins for the castle. The tower is allowed to be entered, and you can actually climb up into the tower and get some nice views over the city of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. About 30 to 40 miles from Vilnius is Trakai Castle. This particular castle is built on an island. It was built around the same time as the Gediminas Tower and Castle. This is a picture of the inner courtyard of the keep, which would have been the main section of the castle. There's a picture of one of the towers from the inside courtyard. Once again, this structure has a number of different buildings associated with it. This is Rundale Palace, built for the Dukes of Courland, section of Latvia. It is built in the Baroque style. It has similarities with Versailles Palace, especially in terms of its gardens in the back. You can see the painted ceilings and the gilt along the walls, the fancy colored wallpaper. The palace is used for various events today. Once again, visitors are allowed through this particular palace. A set of interesting castles are located across from each other. This is the Sigulda medieval castle and the Turaida castle in Latvia, further north from Rundale. So they sit across from each other from the Guaja River, and so one's on the north side, the Turaida, and the Sigulda is on the south side. You can see the cross in the medieval castle there. These are both held by the Livonian order. There's actually a modern castle, but it is more of a manor/palace style building in front of the medieval castle. If you go to the capital of Estonia, Tallinn, there are a number of palaces and castles around. Kadriorg, or the presidential palace in Tallinn, was ordered built by Peter the Great for Catherine I. It uses the Petrine or Peter Baroque style. It too has extensive gardens on part of the palace grounds. The Toompea Castle, or Toompea Castle, has several different types of structure. The tower there is known as Tall Herman. Herman was sort of a word used for Germans. The lower part, the pink part, is part of the palace structure also. This particular area of Tallinn had a number of fortifications and palaces built on top of it. It is currently used by the government of Estonia, as is the presidential palace, and when I visited, it was actually the current president's office, so it was sort of off limits to visit the interior at that time frame. It sort of serves as their White House. Moving over to Moscow, so this is part of the Kremlin, which meant it was a defensive area. The building in the back there is the Grand Palace, controlled by Grand Dukes for a while, eventually became the Palace for the Tsars. A lot of it is a museum today, and you can see the Russian Orthodox churches to the right of the picture. Moscow also has the Novodevichy Convent. It's sort of a fortified convent. You can see the towers along the walls. You can see the crenellations in the wall. Members of the aristocracy and the royal family would be sent there. Usually they're women, where they would be isolated from anyone else. It's very decorative, and it was capable of defending itself quite nicely. Going back west to the Netherlands, this is Noordeinde Palace. It is one of 3 palaces for the Netherlands or the Dutch royal family. This one is actually in use as an office building and also used for one of the princes. I'm not sure whether you're able to go into the inside, but you can walk by it on the street. It is located in The Hague. Moving into Belgium, this is the old medieval style castle. This is Gravenstein Castle, and it was built for the Counts of Flanders, which was part of Belgium. You can see the various structures. I'm not sure whether the water there is part of the canal system or part of a moat. I was only able to get to part of the castle grounds. But this sort of looks like the old type of castles you often see in movies. It can be visited. It has a museum and, of course, the castle grounds. If you go to the Czech Republic, this is part of the Prague Castle. This is arguably one of the largest castles in the world, 750,000 square feet. There are multiple buildings built in a variety of architectural styles. Large parts of it are open to the general public to visit. If you go down the hill into the main part of Prague, you can visit the Wallenstein Palace, built by Albrecht Wallenstein. He served as a commander for the Habsburg Emperor. The palace today is used by the Czech Senate for office buildings. You can see one of the hedge gardens there in the back part of his palace grounds. The Baroque style with the painted and ceilings and arches. If you go to Portugal, this is São Jorge Castle or St. George Castle. This was probably built by the Berbers, but has been added on. It is an old style castle. It actually looks over the center part of Lisbon on the heights. As you can see, it's a very stout looking castle. It is open to visitors. It's primarily the walls and the rooms. There's not a lot of interior decorations. And this was actually more a real castle, not a Renaissance style or not a palace. This is the Royal Palace in Madrid, Spain. It is the official residence of the King of Spain. However, they actually live outside of Madrid. This is in the Baroque style. You cannot take pictures in large parts of the palace. When I visited, there were a few sections where you're allowed to, and that's primarily into the entrance areas and a couple of the corridors. As you can see, once again, it's a very large structure and very gilt and very ornate. Spain has several pieces of Moorish or Islamic architecture in terms of castles and palaces. The Alhambra, located in Granada, is one of these. Granada would be the last part of Spain to be retaken by the Spanish, and the Alhambra is a very impressive set of palace grounds and fortress. As you can see from some of the structures within the castle grounds or palace grounds, the Islamic elements, the reflecting pool, the geometric gardens, the Islamic style arch or Middle Eastern arch, the calligraphy carved into the walls. Most of that, by the way, will be verses of the Quran, the highly decorative ceilings and tiles. If you go further south and slightly to the west, you can go to Sevilla and visit the Alcázar de Sevilla, built in the Mudéjar style of architecture. As you can see, obviously, tourists are allowed in. This is known as the Lion Gate because of the tiled line above the entrance gate. It has a lot of similarities with the Alhambra. Once again, the fancy ornate tiling seen on the arch, the reflecting pool, the gardens. This is part of the inner grounds, ceilings. A lot of money and effort was placed into making these places look the way they do. If you take a cruise and you end up near Villefranche del Sur, France, basically if you're going to Nice, most likely you will port here, and right along the harbor is the Citadel de Saint Elmo. You can see the moat structure, the deepening of the ground. Moats were designed to provide additional height for attackers. You can see the towers. Parts of this are open to the public, as there are a number of museums located inside the castle or fortification grounds. This is Miramare Castle. It is located in Trieste, Italy, along the Adriatic coastline in the north. This was built by the orders of the Archduke Maximilian, who later became the first emperor of Mexico, also the last emperor of Mexico. As you can see, it's very ornate. You are allowed to visit this particular castle. One of the interesting things about Miramare Castle, which it's really more of a palace, is this palace was used by the U.S. Army as a regional headquarters at the end of World War II. A lot of people don't realize that the Venetian Republic actually had its own little empire. And if you go to Greece and some of the Mediterranean islands, you can see parts of their empire. This is Brzi Castle. It is actually located on a small island off the coast of Naphtalios. You can visit this particular castle. It was built initially to protect the city from pirates, and later would be used against potential Ottoman attackers. It is built in the medieval style, as you can see from its very thick walls and the same style similar to Gravenstein Castle. If we move down to Malta, which is a set of islands south of Sicily, you could visit the Grand Master's Palace. As you can see from the outside of the palace, it's fairly plain. However, the inside is extremely decorative. The Grand Master would have been the leader of the Knights of St. John, or the Knights Hospitalier. It currently serves as the President's Office of Malta, but portions of the building are open to the general public. If you go to Israel, more than likely if you go to Jerusalem, you will see the Tower of David or Jerusalem Citadel. Technically, this is actually built by the Mamluks of Egypt and by the Ottoman Empire. During the time of King Herod, this particular area did have some fortifications built during the Roman era over Jerusalem. You can also see, if you look at it, the fact that Jerusalem is a fortified city with the walls. The inside of the Tower of David has a number of museums, 3, and it is open to the public on most days. One of the more interesting palaces I got to visit is Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey. It's the structure on the top. I am in a Genoa tower across the Horn, that body of water, the Golden Horn. And on the opposite side over there is Asia. The tower, or the palace, is actually in Europe. At its height, this palace would have had about 5,000 people working and or living in the palace grounds. There are at least 5 courts, or 4 courts, depends on how you count them. These are some of the structures in the exterior of the main part of the palace. The kitchen today serves as a porcelain museum. These are other structures that have been used for the administration of the Ottoman Empire. The gates are known as the Gates of Salutation, and this would lead into the next court inside. You can visit the grounds, obviously. The little pathway, if you look in the top upper left picture, basically leads what they call the harem route. So a harem was the section of the palace which was off limits to all the males except for the sultan and eunuchs. Here's a picture of the imperial hall, or the throne. The throne would have sat for the sultan. And once again, you can see some similar elements from what we saw with the Alcazar in Sevilla and Alhambra, the tiled walls, the decorative ceilings. Topkapi would later be replaced by Dolmabahce Palace during the 1800s. I hope that you have enjoyed this short and brief presentation about palaces and castles.